Hello, everyone. This is another Black Conservative. I am Ryan Bowling. Thank you all for joining me once again. So I was reading an article in Breitbart News where it stated essentially that comedian and talk show host Bill Maher, I believe that's his name, stated in an interview with Joe Rogan that the extreme left, if you will, is no different than the KKK. And why does he make that argument? Because of their insistent focus on race. Now, when you have someone who clearly is liberal, which Joe Rogan and Bill Myers are, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, and you have these individuals turning against the very group that they are a member of, whether they realize it or not, then you have a problem. Because the people themselves are turning against their own people, okay? But let me say this right up front. Before I get into this article and read their arguments, the argument that I'm going to present is more than likely going to be a little bit different than the argument some other YouTube content creators have basically given in their videos. My argument is going to be a little bit different, and I'm going to explain to you what that argument is as we get into this article right now. So let's get right into this. But it is interesting to have someone from your own group turn against you and say, wait a minute, man, you guys are, you're no different than the KKK. Okay, let's get right into this. Comedian and HBO late night host Bill Maher said woke leftists share similarities with the KKK due to their complete insistence on always judging people by race instead of character. Speaking with Joe Rogan on the Joe Rogan Experience, Maher discussed the woke left's departure from the liberalism of the past, noting that they do not support the concept of, quote, a colorblind society. Let's get into this here. Now, he talks about liberalism of the past. He says, you're like liberals back when they were more reasonable before they became leftists. And now every liberal kind of has to be a leftist, Rogan said. So this is, now mind you, before I go any further into this, of course, you know, this is an article, so it only gives you a small fraction of what that actual interview was all about. So I'm only reading to you the information that the article was giving, okay? And I'll give my spin on this. I can't give my spin on the entire interview because I didn't see it. He goes on to say, if you want to be on the team, you've got to subscribe to the most fringe ideas that the team is promoting. Maher said that the concept of, quote, liberal is a different animal than woke, saying they depart on issues of political correctness and identity politics. While Maher said that people can hold their beliefs, he felt that they should not be welcome under the liberal label. Now let's see what he has to say. You can be woke with all the nonsense that now implies, but don't say that somehow it's an extension of liberalism, because it's most often actually an undoing of liberalism. So this is Bill Maher's argument. He's saying that these woke people are not a part of the liberal establishment. They're not a part of the liberal movement. This is his argument. But I'm going to say right up front, it's the same thing. But let me read you here. He says, you can have your points of view and your positions on these things, but don't try and piggyback on what I always believe. I have always believed, as liberals do, for example, in a colorblind society, Maher said, that the goal is not to see race at all, anywhere for any reason, Maher continued. That's what liberals always believe all the way through Obama, going back to Kennedy, everybody, Martin Luther King Jr. That's not what the woke believe. Now, based on what he said here in this argument, my argument is the opposite. He says that you can be woke with all these nonsense that it now implies, but don't say that it's somehow an extension of liberalism. My argument is it is an extension of liberalism, and I'm going to explain to you why I believe it's an extension of liberalism. And I'm going to go a little more in detail of that. Is the liberal establishment began to earn their wings, so to speak, in the 1960s countercultural revolution. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details about that, except to say that you had the Frankfurt School Marxists that infiltrated our country. And I always talk about that in the 1930s. But in the 1960s countercultural revolution, you had a lot of other things going on, too. You had what was called the New Left. Okay, the New Left or basically a more aggressive extension of liberalism, and I'm going to explain the different forms of liberalism in a minute, was basically more aggressive, more forward in their viewpoints. This new left was, even though they were more aggressive, they believed in trying to push their liberal worldviews a little bit at a time. Even though they were more aggressive than the past liberal worldviews, they were still in the camp of, let's do this a little bit at a time, though. A little bit at a time. Let's infiltrate the school systems. Let's infiltrate the politics. Let's infiltrate the college campuses. Let's infiltrate the entertainment industry, and push these radical views through changing the minds and the belief systems of the people. They were still liberals, but they were still liberals, and they were somewhat more aggressive than the past liberal views in terms of the Marxist Frankfurt School Marxists that infiltrated our country in the 1930s, because the Frankfurt School Marxists, which were liberals or of the left in the 1930s, was very subtle. Okay, they were very quiet. The new left of the 1960s was more aggressive in the sense that they were pushing it more intensely. It's nowhere near what it is now, but I'm going to explain why they're so overly aggressive today. But my argument is, it's still the same group, the left and liberals. It's still the same group. Okay. But they said, we got to put in the 1960s counterculture revolution. They said, we got to push this a little bit more. We got to push it in institutions. We got to push it in entertainment industry. We got to push it in the politics. We have to push these worldviews in religion, in the denominations, Christian denominations. It was a forward, intensive push, but nowhere near as aggressive as it is today. And there's a reason for that. There definitely is a reason for that. Now, let me explain what this reasoning I believe is. And I don't want to I'm trying to condense this, but the reason why the liberal establishment, which is the same as the left that Bill Maher says he's not a part of, okay, the reason why they're pushing these worldviews, this wokeism so hard in movies and in educational systems, I mean, they just went crazy, is because Donald Trump, when he was in office, his policies slowed them down. It was always the plan of the liberal establishment to push a lot of views and worldviews that were considered to be immoral and considered to be not good at all. Okay, from the average perspective of people who are raised on certain moral standards and values. Okay, now you can reason that all you want to, but I could create another video on that all day. But Donald Trump's policies slowed them down. It was always in the plan of the liberal establishment, the liberal left, to push transgenderism and all these other what's considered to be sexually immoral viewpoints on the schools. It was always the plan of the liberal establishment to push moral relativism. That was always the plan. The concept of moral relativism came from the left, liberalism. It came from liberals. Moral relativism came from liberals. Now you say, what is moral relativism? And it all goes all the way back to the 60s and even prior to that, but it really amped up in the 60s. Moral relativism is a system of belief that says there's no such thing as absolute right or wrong. Prior to the 1960s, Americans generally, not all the time, but generally believed, for the most part, in absolute right and absolute wrong when it came to certain things. Okay? For example, adultery. That was considered, committing adultery was considered wrong, period. There wasn't no excuse for it. When the the new left took hold in the 1960s, they changed it into what is known as moral relativism. This is also a part of John Dewey's humanist, John Dewey, who was a socialist and the father of, when many consider to be the father of progressive education in America, he co-wrote rather a group of books known as Humanist Manifestos 1 and Humanist Manifestos 2. This was incorporated into the school systems. And one of the things that John Dewey wrote about in the Humanist Manifestos 1 and 2 was the idea of what is known as moral relativism, that there is no absolute right or wrong, that moral relativism is based on your circumstances. So say, for instance, you're married and your husband or your wife is tipping out on you, or they're not treating you like you think you should be treated, or husband or wife should be treated, then you are perfectly justified in committing adultery. Hey, they pushed you into that corner and you need to be loved and you need affection, so you're justified in doing that. That's what moral relativism is. Prior to the 1960s infiltration of moral relativism, as I said earlier, most Americans believed in absolute right or wrong. This is a part of liberalism, not wokeism. This is a part of liberalism. So Joe Rogan and Bill Myers, but Bill Myers in particular, is still a part of the same group of people. It's not different. His argument is we're different. No, you're still a part of the same group. It's just that when Trump was in office, his policies slowed them down and hindered them. We got to understand something that's very important. The original plan was supposed to go like this. President Obama, 8 years of liberal worldviews, but it was soft. It was real soft and slow. The purpose is to change people's worldviews slowly. All those traditional worldviews, turn them upside down, but do so slowly. You got to do it slowly. Okay, President Obama was a part of that group. Okay. Then the other plan was, after he got out of office, the plan was Hillary Clinton, another 4 years, maybe 8 years of the same worldviews. And many argue her worldviews were supposed to be even more radical than Obama's worldviews. But the point is, same worldviews, changing up on morality, all of these type of things. All these worldviews that are being pushed in the schools right now, like I said, transgenderism and all this type of stuff, I believe it was already in the plan from the beginning. It's just that Trump slowed them down. His policies slowed them down because, as you know, Donald Trump, when he was in office, he tried to push against critical race theory being pushed in the schools. He tried to push against these schools pushing transgenderism and aggressively pushing transgenderism and aggressively pushing these drag queen hours in the schools or drag queen hours in the libraries. I mean, they just went off. They was increasing their attack, but he tried to, his policies basically slowed them down. Now that he's out of office, they have someone else in office now, and that's Joe Biden. You can argue all day whether or not the election was stolen. I'm not finna get into that. But now we have Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a robot. The deep state can use him, and they know he's going to submit to whatever they say. You can look at Joe Biden and tell, not just because of his cognitive abilities is kind of declined and so forth, not just that. You can look at him and listen to him and tell he's a robot. He's a robot. You can tell. He's doing what he's been told to do. He's saying what he's been told to say. And so now that they got him in office, Trump, you slowed us down. Now we're going to push it extra hard. And what you're seeing is the same liberal establishment that was established in the 1960s New Left counterculture revolution situation. Okay. Same thing. They're saying, oh, you slowed us down, Mr. Trump. Now that we got our puppet in office, now we're going to push this extra hard. Why? Because we have an agenda. So wokeism is a part of the same platform of liberalism. Okay? It's just that Trump's policies slowed them down. Why do you think about it? Prior to Trump being in office, was it that aggressive? Is all this stuff, was it that aggressive? No, it wasn't. Even when Trump got in office, they kind of increased it a little bit, but it didn't get as aggressive as it was when he got out of office. When he got out of office, the floodgates came open. This came open. It's like, man, where's all this? It became so obvious. You had people like Joe Rogan and Bill Myers coming against it. Like, what are you doing? You people just like the KKK. You're this, you're that. It's the same platform, boo-boo. It's the same platform. It's just that it got slowed down. Now they said we got to change this. We got to change this. Now, let me say something else here that's very important. And this is what I want to explain. There were two forms, or actually there is two forms of liberalism: classical liberalism and contemporary liberalism. Classical liberalism, which is not the same as his contemporary liberalism, which is what Bill Maher is a part of. Classical liberalism was the form of liberalism of freedom that had to do with restraining the powers of the government upon the freedom to choose in the people. In other words, particularly in Great Britain and in early history of America, classical liberalism was always was about the freedom to worship the way that you wanted to worship. If you were a religious person, you had the freedom to worship the way you wanted to worship without the restrictions of the government telling you how to worship, who to worship, and when to worship, and where to worship. The other concept of classical liberalism was the freedom to learn, the freedom to read, the freedom to get an education. That was classical liberalism. It was liberalism in the sense that you were free, but it was liberalism that had moral restraints. During classical liberalism, it still pushed and promoted the idea of what was right and what was wrong. Okay, they still held on to certain belief systems that were derived, and I know people don't like this, but it's true, it's history, that were derived from a biblical premise. Okay, because many of the founders of America, not all of them, some of them were Illuminati members, some of them were Masons, some of them were deists. Okay, we can get into all of that, but it was a mixture. It was an amalgamation of different worldviews, and they all agreed to some extent that certain moral standards need to be consistent with everyone else. And these moral standards were in large part based on biblical principles. So classical liberalism was based on a biblical principle of the freedom to choose, but still maintain a moral restraint. Contemporary liberalism is the removal of all moral restraints with the excuse of freedom of speech. Contemporary liberalism is you can do whatever you want to do. You can promote immoral material. You can promote all kinds of craziness and still be free. That's contemporary liberalism. Okay. Contemporary liberalism pushes the idea of adult men, and I know this sounds sick, but it is a part of the liberal platform. Has been for decades. Now, I'm pretty sure Bill Maher doesn't agree with it, but he doesn't seem to understand the history of what liberalism is. It pushed the idea of grown men engaging in the sexual acts with underage children. This was initiated by a professor that I cannot remember his name, but he was around in the 1950s or 60s, I believe. I cannot remember his name. But yeah, it was an actual Harvard College professor. Liberal, okay? This was all the platform of liberalism, okay? Another thing people don't understand too about liberalism, and I'm not talking about the wokeism stuff, I'm talking about liberalism, is that liberalism and progressivism are extensions of communism, which infiltrated our country to a large part, not just through the Frankfurt School Marxists, because they were communists as well, but through actual communist infiltrators that infiltrated our country in large part. I'm going to go into the detail of that, but progressivism and liberalism are extensions, and they are extensions of communism. They're just non-violent, non-aggressive extensions of communism, or more or less non-violent extensions of communism, but that's what they are, because the end goal is always the same: total government control over your life. That's the end goal. It's just done without violence. It's done through the legislative process. It's done through changing your worldview. where people used to believe in certain morals and values decades ago prior to the 1960s, they no longer believe that now. Why? Because there was a change in worldview, and the liberal establishment, for the most part, had everything to do with that. So it wasn't about the woke, the extreme left. The extreme left is the same thing as the liberal. It's just that the people that were in the liberal establishment, liberal front, said, "Oh man, Trump's slowing us down. We got to do something." And they were the ones bold enough to jump up and say, "Hey, let's change it. Let's really get people to accept what we're trying to push." Because Trump's policy slowed us down. Let's finish it. I can go on and on with this, because there's so much to this. But I can go on and on with this. But I want to continue reading the rest of this article here. He says, let's go on here, because I can go on and on with this. Maher said that such beliefs about race have more in common with the white supremacist organization, KKK, as opposed to actual liberalism. Mm-hmm. But what he failed to realize is that liberalism is all about, like I said, liberalism is an extension of communism, which infiltrated our country many decades ago. And the objective is, or at least part of the objective, is to keep division among the races and groups. So liberals are going to do what liberals are going to do. They're going to always be divisive, because that's the ideology, to keep everybody divided, not together. Divide them using identity politics and other things. Divide the people and the groups in order to change their worldviews, and then the true communist insurgents come in and bring in communism. That's the ultimate goal. But let's go on. They believe race is first and foremost the thing you should always see everywhere, which I find interesting, because that used to be the position of the KKK. Maher said, again, you can have that position, but don't say that's a liberal position. You're doing something very different. They're doing something very different, but they're the same group. They're just doing something different. They're just more aggressive, but they're the same group, dude. You just don't have that mindset, but you fail to realize what liberalism was and has always been about. Changing people over the mindset about right and wrong and about what we consider to be moral. The purpose is to change that mindset over the course of many, many years. The communists understood, that infiltrated the West, and America in particular, understood that they could not change the mindset of America with violence. There would be a big resistance, and it would be with guns. So they had to change the mindset of the people through, as I said earlier, through propaganda, twisting the truth into a lie. I mean, all this type of stuff they use, and they understood it would take several generations to do so, because Americans were still, in part, free people. And they were accustomed to being free. They were accustomed to having the freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom to own a gun and freedom to be whatever you wanted to be. They were and still are accustomed to that. So you have to change that over the course of several generations. And the communist insurgents understood that. That is one of the reasons why we have these different variables of communism. Okay? The Frankfurt School of Marxism is one of them. I'll go on. I got to get a little bit more here. Frankfurt School of Marxism is another soft form. It's also called, Frankfurt School of Marxism is also called cultural Marxism, because you're changing the culture, changing the way they think about embracing communism. Fabian Socialists, okay, which was created in the late 1800s in London, England. It was called the Fabian Society. They believed in infiltrating the West through what they call permeation. You permeate the institutions a little bit at a time, and you change the worldviews of the institutions. All this is the same. It's the same thing. It's just a soft form of communism. And Bill Myers is a part of the same position. This has always been the objective, to keep everybody divided. It's just that he doesn't see that, because he's like, man, this is crazy. But he fails to realize that Trump slowed them down. Now they say, okay, we got to get extra aggressive. Let's go on. As Breitbart News reported in May, Maher called out the woke insanity being pushed at the university level and his departure from liberalism. This is my thing with liberals and woke. Carry on believing whatever the F you want. Just don't claim you're some kind of advanced liberal, Maher said. They're not claiming to be advanced liberals. They're claiming to be the same people. You're the opposite of liberal. Liberals are the ones who come up with the term homelessness so that people wouldn't call them bums and vagrants and hobos. We came up with homelessness. Then they came along and said, that's not good enough. Actually, you people are the problem. It's people experiencing homelessness. I'm about to end the video just on this right here. Here's where I have to argue too. And I'm going to use Thomas Sowell's argument on this whole idea of the liberals creating the concept of homelessness. But why did the liberals create the concept of homelessness versus bums and vagrants? Huh? Why did they do that? Was it good? Was it really good? Okay, let's see. I want to read you this because I want to read you guys this because I don't want to. I don't want to misquote anything, but I wanted to read you this from Thomas Sowell's book he wrote in 1994 called "The Vision of the Anointed." Okay, and that's just a phrase or an expression that deals with people in leadership positions, mainly the liberal establishment, who basically anointed themselves to be the avatars of all morality, okay? And that their way is the best way. They know better than you. They know better than anybody because they're educated and they have the philosophical viewpoints that would help everybody. Okay, well, reality, yeah, they did come up with the term homelessness, but I'm going to read you a passage out of Thomas Sowell's book where he addresses this problem in this very, very great book, by the way. I highly recommend it. And we're going to find out exactly what the purpose was. I'm going to read this real quick. I want to read it because I don't want to misquote. Let's see. I'm going to start off with, let's see here. I'm going to start off with this part here. So check this out. A textbook example of someone with antisocial behavior being turned into a mascot by a judge with a vision of the anointed was Richard F. Kremer, a vagrant who made a nuisance of himself in a New Jersey public library. During the late 1980s, a number of homeless people began coming into this library in the small town of Maher, New Jersey, disturbing both the other library users and the staff by their behavior and their body odors. Richard F. Kremer, in particular, often exhibited offensive and disruptive behavior, including talking loudly to himself and to others, and on at least one occasion was so belligerent towards the librarian as to cause her to call the police. Some librarians resigned rather than put up with it. Now, I could go on in there, but I don't want to extend too much time. And he goes on into that book and he talks about how that this homeless man, Richard F. Kremer, filed a lawsuit against the library. And I'm just summarizing. He files a lawsuit against the library. The judge that he filed the lawsuit against the librarian ruled in favor of him. This judge was what Thomas Sowell called one of the anointed. The judge was a liberal. And wasn't the woke, the liberal. And this liberal's judge in favor of this homeless person, so-called homeless person, and essentially sued the library for over $100,000. And then as time went on, they began to change the terminology of people that were called bums and vagrants prior to the 1980s. They were called bums and vagrants and people that didn't want to do anything with their life. They changed that old phrase into homelessness. Why did they change it into homelessness? Because the liberal establishment, and I don't want to go in too far. I'm not hating anybody that's liberal. I'm not. I'm just trying to show you what it's really all about in the change of worldviews here. The liberal establishment, they purport this idea of being the avatars of righteousness, of morality. But when they push these policies, the people that tend to get hurt are people like you and I. And to summarize this text here in the book that I just read, now the libraries couldn't file a law. They couldn't say anything to these homeless people. They could come in there and have bad body odor and all the rest because, hey, after all, the judge stated, well, it's a place where you can learn and you can why bar a person that can learn and read and so forth? Why bar them from the library? It's a public place. Why bar them? So the people couldn't say anything to them. But the problem was that while these judges, this liberal judge was feeling sorry for Mr. Richard Kremer, okay, the problem was that you kept having all these people coming in, causing problems, being disruptive, being loud, and you couldn't say anything to them. Richard F. Kremer was not trying to learn. He wasn't trying to learn. He wasn't trying to get an education. He wasn't opening a book. He was causing problems. So the liberal judge's rule was based off of, I feel sorry for him. Another thing too about Richard Crimmer, and I'm going to say this here. And I'm going to go back to what Mr. Maher said about the liberals creating the term homelessness. He's right about that, but it's a little bit deeper than that. According to what Thomas Sowell says here, Richard Crimmer was not born homeless. He inherited a huge estate. I think it was in the millions or the hundreds of thousands. Let me check to make sure. Yeah, he was born into an estate in excess of $340,000. Now, back then, that was a lot of money. That'd probably be in the millions now. He wasn't born homeless. So whatever decisions he made that messed him up and had him homeless, that was probably something that he did. And what's my point? My point is simply this, people, is that Bill Maher's argument that we didn't create, all this crazy stuff and these woke people are not a part of the same thing that I am. It's the same thing. It's the same platform. They've just decided to become more aggressive because Trump slowed them down. And I also said something here about these so-called homeless people. Back in the days before this judge made this call on Richard Crimmer and changed the vernacular of everything, now all these people that would have been considered bums and vagrants prior to that time are now just homeless people who are down on their luck. Back then, before I would even say before the 80s, I would say prior to even the 60s, or I would say before the 60s rather, even before the 60s. If you was caught out there, if you was homeless, most people called you a bum and a vagrant. Because the worldview of people back in those days in America was a man who was able to work should work, regardless of what the job was. Didn't matter what the job was. If the man was able-bodied, he should work. They didn't see it, homelessness to them, if it was, especially if it was something against something that you had power over. They didn't see it as oh man, I feel sorry for him. I feel so sorry. No, if they knew you had the ability to get a job, they would call you a bum and a vagrant, because a bum and a vagrant is someone who has the ability to pick themselves up and they refuse to do so, even when the opportunities are there. Now let's transfer that over into modern day America, where we're looking at all these homeless people. I said this in the past video, and I'm about to sum this video up because it then went longer than usual. When we look at all these, like I said in the previous video, all these so-called homeless people, where are they coming from? Richard Crimmer is just one example of someone who messed up his money and ended up homeless. But the judge, who was a liberal, felt sorry for him and gave the lawsuit in his favor. Where are these homeless people coming from? And a lot of these homeless people people that we consider to be called homeless, and this is why I tell you this all the time. I work downtown in Tower City on Public Square. And a lot of these so-called homeless people, 9 times out of 10, they are able-bodied to pick themselves up and do what they need to do to get out of this situation, but they choose not to. There's been people downtown that I've dealt with and that's been homeless for decades. And all of these jobs that are out here that pay good, you mean to tell me that you can't find a job? You mean even if you couldn't find a job, there are programs out here to help people like that aren't supposedly homeless. And you got to ask yourself a question. Once again, where are all these homeless people coming from? Are they people that down on their luck? A plant closed down and the man lost, the plant closed down. He ended up getting laid off and he ran out of his money and then he ended up losing his home. And then he ended up on the streets. That's possible. And I'm pretty sure that may have happened to some people, but I'm going to tell you this right up front. For those people that have been in that situation that I just named, 9 times out of 10, they're going to do what they need to do to get up out of that pit hole. 9 times out of 10, and they're not going to sit and say, well, I might as well succumb to my circumstances. 9 times they're not going to do that. A lot of these people that are out here, for the significant number of them, are out here and are supposedly homeless, okay? But are out here because of bad choices they made. Now they're out here and they're getting mad at society for what they themselves did, and they're suffering the consequences. let me say this and end this video on this. Bill Maher says he's not a part of the woke establishment, the far left. These guys are racist. They're this, they're that. They're the same thing as the KKK. Okay, you can argue that. But you are still a part of the same group of people, my brother. You are still a part of the same group of people. Why don't you just merge over to the conservative side? Because all of this division is not helping anything. I could go on and on and on with this, but I want to end it on this. He goes on to say, then they came along and said, that's not good enough. Actually, you people are the problem. It's people experiencing homelessness. That's the end of that article right there. And what he's saying is that the radical left, or the radical left, the woke people are saying, oh, these homeless people are the problem of society. The problem with Bill Maher's argument there, and I'm going to sum it up here. The problem with this argument there is that that's the argument that the liberal judge said back in the 1980s for Mr. Clinton, decades ago. That's not new. The whole idea, in other words, the judge said that these homeless people, you people getting mad. I'm paraphrasing his words. You can read the book, read it on your own in the book. I'm paraphrasing his words. He said, instead of you people in the librarians getting mad at these homeless people, why don't you guys do something to help them? It's basically, he was saying, it's your fault that these homeless people are homeless. That's how liberals think. Liberals, particularly in the establishment, blame everything and all other people's problems on other people. It's not your fault. You are oppressed, homeless people. It's the other people who have jobs, who have careers, who did something with their life. It's their fault that you're homeless. That was going on back then. Guess what? It's going on today. It's nothing new, Mr. Maher. It's just, in other words, bottom line is this. It's the same worldview that he's a part of. By him saying, oh, you know what? They're the ones came up with, it's your fault. No. He's saying that the far left is saying that. No, it wasn't the far left. It was the liberal establishment. It's been going on. They were pushing that agenda of it's your fault, it's society's fault for decades. Yep, that's it right there, man. This is way too long to edit some of this. But you guys understand what I'm saying. That was my argument on this whole idea of the KKK thing. Because to me, that's pretty simplistic. You can go over to KKK and get, well, yeah, you know, they sound like the KKK because they're focusing on race. But my argument on that, and I promise I'm going to close it on this, with their focus and intent on race is on purpose. It's to keep us divided. As long as you keep talking about race, it'll keep people divided, and it will keep certain groups of people voting for a particular political party, thus keeping that political party in office. That's all that is. Keep us divided so we can't unite, so that the people who feel like they're oppressed by the other party will vote for the party that pushes this agenda and keep them in power. That's what I think. What do you guys think? Leave your comments in the comment section below. Like, share, and subscribe to my channel. God bless you all. See you again.